All right, welcome to Rave Files, yada, yada, yada. We're on episode, I don't know, because I don't watch my own content and all that nonsense. I'm out for blood tonight. Okay, I may be a loser. I may be uncool. They may laugh at me. They may point. They may sit on my face. But I don't know how to spell. I'm so bad at spelling, and autocorrect is one of the greatest things that has ever happened to me. Not that it ever wasn't happening to me, because I grew up during the tech explosion. However, there are some times when there is absolute nonsense that appears on my screen. So I was just sending a message that said coming home. And when I wrote the word coming, I hit the space bar instead of hitting the C, and then spelled the rest of the word correctly. Would you like to guess what it autocorrected to? No, you're wrong. You're wrong. It autocorrected to okaying, which, on its own is like, okay, whatever, that's fine, I guess. But no, they spelled it okay, apostrophe, ing. I don't know what kind of monstrosity decided that was an okay thing to autocorrect. Like, what kind of spliced word? Okay is already an abbreviated word, and then you're just, whoa, that scared the heck out of me. Anyway, that's all I got for my cold open, which wasn't really a cold open because I gave myself an intro. But anyway, I'm mad about it. Autocorrect is cool. Now let's get on to the good stuff. Yeah, so I had a rehearsal tonight. That's where I'm coming from, and that's where I record all of these things. Also, I look I looked good until I showed you the top of my head. Got self-burned. Feels bad. We just got pooped on at rehearsal. Our concert's next week. If you've been following, this will be posted, and my concert will be 6 days off from when I post this video. And yikes, to be honest. We just did a piece that was a little spooky. I mean, the text of the piece is an Emily Dickinson poem, which, if you are familiar with Emily Dickinson, which a lot of people are, she's very famous. Her poetry is nonsense. It's not nonsense. I mean, if you spend a lot of time with it, you can get an idea and a feel for what it is that she's meaning. She kind of pioneered like a modernist poetry movement, so she's cool in that way. And I respect the modernist movement in English because it's not just rhyming, which poetry as an art form originated with a lot of rules, and actually I think it had more rules than prose did. Which is kind of funny because English people don't think that that's true, but it is. Poetry was also the main writing form of like historians, doctors, and all sorts of things like that. And they had very strict meters that they had to, contain, and like different moods of poetry held different sort of like a meter, like epic poetry like the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid all was written in the same way. So when you would read it like bum ba da dum bum bum ba da dum bum bum ba da dum bum 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 ba da dum ba da dum ba da dum bum. That was fun. So that's how you would read like epic poetry. And then Shakespeare, good old Willie Shakes, tried to replicate that with some English poetry where he used a few different meters, like iambic pentameter, which I'm sure you heard in 10th grade, which is ba-dum, 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 and it kind of replicates the heartbeat. And then sometimes he would use a different kind of meter when witches were talking. Ba-dum, 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 because it sounds a little weird, a little weirder, a little witchy, or all sorts of things like that. And Like William Wordsworth would write some poetry. A lot of like nursery rhymes were written in that witchy meter. Bottom, because it sounds a little funny, a little quirky, a little weird. So that's what that's about. Little lamb, ba-da-dum, So, I just crossed the street, and I did not have a light that told me I should cross the street, but I just went for it, and I didn't really look either way, but there were no cars moving, so I figured it was fine. I'm all over the place tonight. You guys got a wild episode. This is a banger. It's so windy, and my hand is frozen. What was I don't even know what my point was. I've been on like 3 tangents since last Friday. I was talking about poetry. Oh yeah, so the reason why I respect Emily Dickinson and her impact on American/English poetry, English language, it's cool that she broke the mold of poetry, which, yes, poetry, part of it always was like breaking the mold a little bit was a cool little move that you could do. And prose was, how you communicated. That's how like things changed. But then because of those things changing and prose became the number one medium for writing, poetry kind of occupied this space where people were like, oh, there should be rules. And then because English isn't an inflected language, which means it doesn't use endings that change, like every word is that word, unless it's, plural or something, or past tense. But generally every word doesn't change. Because of that, it became way harder to write poetry in meter, because you couldn't just change up your sentence a little bit and change up the endings. You pretty much just had to find a new word, which is partially why, English has so many words, because people just had to make up new ones, because you couldn't just change up a word like you could in Latin or ancient Greek. But that's exactly why Shakespeare invented 1,700 words, so that he could fit his meter with an uninflected language. So because of that, poetry in English just kind of turned into, I can rhyme the last word of every line, and it's like, really? This again? So for these reasons, I'm out. Just kidding. So for those reasons, it's cool that Emily Dickinson shook up the meta. She was like, look, I'm going to be nuts and write this thing that's really hard to decipher, but kind of makes sense. So, all that being said, I severely dislike reading Emily Dickinson poetry because it is very hard to read and it's not easy to stomach. And what's even worse is I'm singing a 18-minute long group of songs all set to Emily Dickinson's poems. And the music, while the notes aren't that hard, the rhythms are equal to Emily Dickinson's words. If you can kind of understand. Sorry, that bus is quite loud. If you can kind of understand what I mean, I'm doing a little analogy here. The words that Emily Dickinson writes are all over the place, as is the rhythms of these pieces that we're singing. Which is why when we spent an hour and a half today in choir going over this 18-minute long group of pieces, it was rough because everyone in the choir was like, ugh. Also, something that I've noticed about more amateur singers is that it's pretty hard to learn how to read music, and reading music as a language is very difficult to understand. But rhythm is like a completely different beast, and keeping time is a tricky thing to do. And I've always found that, like, for myself, I've worked a lot on keeping a good rhythm, and I'm pretty good at it. But for a lot of amateur singers, they focus a lot more on notes, and especially if they can't read music that well, they memorize pieces, which is valuable. But memorizing a piece, like the notes, if you keep on listening to it and you don't read it, that'll help. But it's problematic because, like, say you start working on a piece and then out of nowhere the conductor is just like, I'm going to take it slower today. If you just memorize the notes and the rhythms and you can't really read the music and the rhythms, you're going to be messing up everyone. So rhythm is really important, and I feel like it's something, it's so easy to get the basis of. Like, rhythm is easier to learn the basics of than reading music. But reading music kind of stays the same every time, but rhythm changes every time. Like, notes on a page are always the same 12 every time. And if you know the intervals, you know the intervals. Some of them are easier than others. It is what it is. Rhythms change every single time the conductor gives you your count to start singing. And if you don't get a feel for, like, if you don't get a read on what your conductor is giving you, and then you can translate that into what you see on the page, it can mess people up. And that's why I think pieces that have harder rhythms are harder to learn than pieces that have hard music. Because you could just find a recording of a piece that has a hard, melody, and you just memorize it and then you're good. But if it has a hard rhythm, you're like, you got to know that. And a lot of amateur singers, musicians don't. So that's that section. I guess this is a long episode, but I hope I kept your jimmies peaked. For my editorial segment, learn music. There you go. That's a good one. Music is really fun. And usually once I go to music practice, I am singing and really annoying to my girlfriend because I can't stop singing the same, like, 2 measures over and over and over and over again. That won't be a problem tonight, though, as in a week from when I post this. A week before I post this, for you guys seeing it. Anyway, it's not gonna be a problem because it's all freaking Emily Dickinson in my head, and none of it is stuck because none of it is earworms, and it's terrible. And I don't like it. But I gotta find a way to love it so that I memorize it in the next 10 days, because that's when my concert is. So anyway, have a good time. Love you, my filers. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.